Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for tuning into this webinar on getting community buy-in for fortnightly waste with guest speakers Joley Vidau and Esther Landells. My name is Kat Heinrich. I'm an associate consultant at Rawtec. For those of you who don't know us, Rawtec is a waste management consultancy. We work across Australia helping councils, state government and businesses in a range of different areas, including waste and resource management and the circular economy. This is our 5th webinar in a series that we're running to share best practice and innovation in the Australian waste and resource management industry. Every few weeks we've been inviting leaders and innovative thinkers to share their thoughts and their projects. And today we're talking about getting community buy-in for fortnightly waste collections. Now we know that the best recycling rates are achieved by councils that have weekly food organics and garden organic services, so weekly Fogo services, that are coupled with fortnightly waste collections and fortnightly comingled recycling collections. But getting communities to transition to this service can be very challenging, as we all know, and it can be met with community outcry. And I always think about the example of Carl Stefanovic. I don't know if you're familiar with him, he's on Breakfast TV. But I never forget the day I saw him piping up and complaining and saying, oh, the world is going to end, this is a terrible idea, Melbourne's thinking about introducing fortnightly garbage collections. So it is really challenging. But with the right community engagement, the service model can be embraced by the community. Shortly, we'll hear from our guest speakers on how 2 Australian councils got community buy-in for weekly Fogo and fortnightly waste. Before we hear from our guest speakers, I want to quickly cover off on some housekeeping. The webinar will run for about an hour. It's interactive. There's a Q&A box at the bottom, so please make sure to put your questions in there throughout. We will take some of your questions during the interview section, but we'll also hold some to the very end. And lastly, it will hopefully be recorded if the technology works, so you'll be able to recap afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our very first speaker, Joley Vidau, from Bega Valley Shire Council. I first met Joley when I was at the COFS conference, and she is an incredibly passionate and knowledgeable person in this space. So Joley actually led the communications for the successful introduction of Bega Valley Council's fortnightly waste collections and brings valuable insights into community engagement. So a warm welcome to you, Joley.
Thanks for having me, Kat. It's good to be here.
So, Joley, just for the audience's sake, some people might not have heard of Bega Valley before. So, can you just give a bit of background about the council, who lives there, how big is it, etc.?
Yeah, so the Bega Valley Shire is the most southern shire in New South Wales, and it does border onto Victoria. Our population is 34,000, and we are a regional council, and we have a beautiful mix of dairy farmers, environmental activists, manufacturing. So it's a really beautiful mix of just different people with different points of view.
Oh gosh, that must make it challenging from a communications perspective to keep everyone happy. And also from a service delivery perspective, I imagine, with the more rural areas in there as well. But we'll touch on that shortly, I'm sure. So just taking a step back to begin with, why did the council introduce fortnightly garbage collections and move to a weekly Fogo service?
Yeah, the main driver for Bega Council was we own our own landfill, and the landfill, which opened at the end of 2013, was meant to last 37 years. And at the current filling rate, we're going to get around 22 out of it. So obviously for us, it was about preserving that landfill space, and it comes down to dollars really for us.
Okay, so you have a need to make sure you're diverting material from landfill, but why specifically were you looking at that particular service model to move garbage collections to fortnightly and introduce a food and garden organics service?
Yeah. So, I mean, we'd done a fair bit of research before we rolled out Fogo, and we knew that to make behaviour change actually really work, sometimes you have to force the hand. And for us, we knew that if we didn't have a fortnightly red bin service, that behaviour change just wasn't going to occur.
Absolutely. And so you've got all these different people, farmers, manufacturers, families, etc. What were the key messages that you used to, if you like, sell moving down to a fortnightly waste collection and introducing Fogo? How did you approach that?
Yeah, so we made sure that we understood the demographic, and then we did 2 separate approaches. So we always, it's quite easy to sell things economically when you're looking for council support. But the other aspect that we approached very, very strongly was environmental. And that's because we have a really high population in the Bega Valley that really support better environmental outcomes. And it's one of the reasons people live regionally down here. So yeah, it was economic and environmental.
Okay, and so what the specific messages were that from an environmental perspective? Was it, you know, by doing this, it's better for the environment? Was it as simple as that? Or did you go to the extent of explaining what happens when you put food waste in the Fogo bin? How much depth did you use when you were communicating those environmental messages?
Good question. So we did, it was probably a two-pronged approach. So we did the overarching, it's bad for the environment, and this is why I talked predominantly about the production of methane, but then made sure that there was more information available if people did want to deep dive and look at, you know, soil degradation and that sort of stuff, carbon sequestration and those types of things. So we made sure that that information was available as well. And economically, it was easy to sell it economically because it did stack up economically. It's cheaper for our council to process and turn the product into compost than it is to landfill. So it was a no-brainer.
No-brainer, yeah. And in terms of the compost messages as well, so you talk about the bad impacts of letting food waste rot in landfill and the methane. Did you also touch at all on producing compost and the benefits that might have to the local economy and improving soil health? Was that in your messaging at all?
Yeah, absolutely it was. And one of the things that we have focused really strongly on in our shire is that closed loop system. So it's the community's compost. So they're getting the benefit of all of their hard work. And that was absolutely how we sold it back, Kat, was like, this is your hard work. Don't contaminate it because it's your product that we're going to sell basically on your behalf.
Brilliant. And then in terms of the actual channels themselves, so there's lots of different channels you can use to communicate, and there's probably different communications channels for different groups of people. So can you step us through what mediums that you use to actually reach the audience to get that message out?
Yeah, so 12 months before we started talking about Fogo with the community, we launched the Bega Valley Waste app. And the reason we did that so early was so that people could get used to using the app before we launched Fogo, because we knew that all the changes in bin collections were going to confuse people. And the waste app has a really easy calendar where you set reminders. It tells you what bins to put out. So we did that 12 months before, and the way we promoted that was through radio and print and council's website. And at that point in time, it was council's Facebook page. And the way we launched that was I asked our lovely mayor, Councillor Christy McBain, to wear her pajamas, and the whole campaign was, don't get caught in the street in your pajamas putting your bins out. So I turned up at her house, she had her flannelette pajamas on, and that was the photo shoot. And what happened from that is not only did people start knowing about and hearing about waste at their local government level, but it also gave the Councillor McBain a beautiful leverage because she was a mum, a working mum. And so people really related to her. So that was the first part. The problem we had is every time we talked about Fogo, people were so keen to use that. Whenever we mentioned the word, because we had a 4-weekly green bin collection, people would start using the service. So we had to be really careful with our messaging before we started. And then our campaign was, as soon as you get your kitchen caddy, Fogo was going to start, and we went gangbusters. Every single communication tool that was available to council, we used in spades, and we absolutely saturated the market.
Okay, so you must have had a reasonable budget to support the communications behind all those different channels. It's not cheap to do advertising. So what kind of budget did you have available to you?
We spent around about $220,000 on all of the comms, and that was predominantly $200,000 of that came from the New South Wales EPA Waste Less, Recycle More. Thank you. We were
I'm sure a few of them are listening right now. Just going, it's all right.
$641,000 in 2 grants we got from the New South Wales EPA, and that is what got it across the line for us, because we could invest in the communication. And if we didn't spend it at the start, we would have been spending it at the end with high contamination rates. And so for us it was, and the EPA recognised that you need to invest at the start.
Yeah, very, very good message. And in terms of project management, because at the end of the day, apart from communications expertise and community engagement, this is a project management exercise to get a whole community across to a new bin service. So how did you handle that? What was the kind of lead times you had leading into it? How many people were behind the scenes doing this changeover?
So I worked for about 12 months on and off on Fogo, and a big part of that was changing the curbside collection contract. So we were out for contract, and that was the first step. So I did that. I probably spent 12 months with a consultant, maybe a day a week, a day a fortnight, sort of getting all the comms together. And then just before the project started, I had a project officer and 2 customer service staff. And the intent of the customer service staff was to take the phone calls. But before we started, we did a whole of drop-in sessions in every town in our shire. And either 3 or 4 of us would go to the drop-in sessions, plus we door knocked businesses and that type of thing, and made sure that that saturation was as strong as it could be. So it was a team of 4 ultimately that managed that project.
Yeah, and the lead time, was it, when did you start planning versus actually, apart from the procurement side of things, which is obviously important, but
Yeah.
the actual communications engagement piece, how far in advance did you plan versus then delivering the actual service?
I spent 10 months. So I started at the start of 2018 and we rolled the service out in October 2018. And I would have definitely spent at least a day a week, and some weeks it was 3 or 4 days a week, but you need that dedicated resource to be managing the project without a doubt.
Okay. And I understand you also got some really cute school kids involved in the campaign. I did see a video, but can you, for the audience, tell them about that campaign that you did with the school kids and what impact did it have on community buy-in?
Yeah, so for us, how do we get that buy-in? Well, everyone loves their kids and their friends' kids and their schoolmates, and the teachers love the kids. So for us, it was about getting that buy-in. So I wanted to run some TV ads, getting the kids to talk to us about Fogo, because if a 3 or a 4 or a 5-year-old can tell us, then surely mum and dad and nana and pop can probably get it right too. And we went out to the community and said, calling all budding TV stars, and we were looking at getting about half a dozen to a dozen kids. We got 50 apply, and we filmed 50 kids. So we made TV ads with all 50 kids. They are adorable. And what that did for us was, it was someone's brother or sister, it was someone's student, it was someone's neighbour, and they all took ownership of this project because the community was involved in such a large capacity. And without a doubt, those kids are what got us across the line. And the campaign was absolutely adorable too.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to see a video of that, and yeah, maybe afterwards we can share some links around of how how funny and cute they are talking about what goes in the food or Fogo bin. Yeah, very, very sweet. Okay, so you've got this whole community behind you now. You've got I'm assuming these videos were launched before the changeover, yes? Or?
Yeah, so they started probably 2 or 3 weeks beforehand.
Okay.
Because we knew that as soon as we said the word Fogo, people would start using the service.
Okay.
Yeah, we paid for a pretty extensive TV campaign about 2 or 3 weeks before we rolled out the service.
Yep, and so you've got that coming up, and then one of the other key elements of your campaign, I understand, was a Facebook page called WTF, not what you think, waste the facts. So can you tell us a little bit about that Facebook page and how did it help you in your communications? Why did you set it up even?
Yeah, we set it up after we launched the Waste app. We noticed how much traffic we were getting through Council's main page, and as the Waste team didn't have the capacity to respond because it was going through a different department, so then we're like, well, we need to set up our own Facebook page so that people can ask and learn about just waste stuff. It was a really hot topic. When we launched the Waste app was when the war on waste just happened to be coming out. The timing was amazing, and the community were asking questions. So we launched the Facebook page, and I wanted to cut through all of the rubbish, and so WTF was born because I wanted to grab people's attention, and that certainly did that. But the benefit of that was that rather than people having issues that were ruminating or, you know, like stewing in the background and this person said this and this person said that, that Facebook page was the facts. If you saw it on that page, it was 100% true. There wasn't these conspiracy theories, and we could address stuff. As soon as someone posted something, we addressed the issue straight away.
So having that resourcing available to be able to respond to these questions was really important too, then, Joley.
Yeah, it was one of the lessons learned that I would recommend for other councils if you are going to set up a Facebook page is have a dedicated resource managing it on the weekends and out of hours, because that platform, people expect you to respond sort of within a reasonably quick time frame. And what that meant was I was actually doing that, and the Facebook page definitely got us across the line, but it just meant that I was doing a lot of work, like a lot of work. It was 20 hours a day basically for the first kind of month, I guess. Yeah. And definitely budget that person to work on the weekends and maybe take them out of the mix during the week so that everyone gets some downtime.
Yeah, really important, like you say, to have someone available to immediately respond before the communication and the community discussion gets carried off somewhere else and the whole world is suddenly falling down because of the fortnightly garbage collections.
Yeah, and the reach was massive. So we would do a post and we'd be reaching 30 or 40,000 people. And yes, some of them aren't in our shire, but a lot of them are. And that people were getting the information. And one of the things we did that worked really well through Facebook was we kind of pitted each town against each other. Like, great work, you know, Cobargo, 0 contamination, and come on, Tarfara, you've got a higher contamination. And we formed this competition between the communities, and they loved it. They all embraced it and they all wanted to win. There was nothing to win other than being the community. And we pushed that all through the Waste the Facts Bega Valley Facebook page.
Being the best is always worth going for. Yeah. But it's funny you say that because that is consistent with research, behaviour change research I've heard from the Netherlands, where they did a trial looking at all different interventions, like, for example, social proof and you know, having neighbourhoods compete with each other and providing fridge magnets, etc. And interestingly, the most effective, or one of the most effective measures was this friendly competition between neighbourhoods. So I think it's a really good takeaway message if you're a council listening in and you're thinking about rolling out this service, is to think about how that works. So was it just Joley simply, how are you measuring the performance, by the way, between councils? Are you measuring the number of bin lifts, or how are you?
Yeah, so for us, the way we were looking and we're measuring between towns was contamination. So our collections contractor has onboard cameras and they report contamination. So we were managing it at the collection point, at the source, but also when the trucks were turning up at our organics processing facility, we were looking at the loads and looking at where there was those high areas of contamination. And that's really how we were sort of promoting it back through the community.
Got you. So it was, the messaging was about this community has a cleaner Fogo stream than this community, other community. Yep. Okay, excellent. And so I understand as part of this, you also trained up your customer service staff to make sure they were able to answer queries. Can you take us through that a little bit?
So what we did before we launched Fogo, the project officer rang every council in New South Wales, I think, that had a Fogo service, and some in Victoria, and we got as many of their lessons learned as we could. And what we did from that is we created a frequently asked questions sort of flow chart, I guess. And what it was the frequently asked question, who was responsible if you needed to progress or move it through, I guess, who would action it if it couldn't get resolved then and there, if there was brochures that you could send out to the customer. And we sent that through to all of our customer service staff, including our library people, all of our transfer station staff. They all had access to it. So if a question came in, firstly, everyone was singing from the same hymn book, but also the escalation process was detailed. We thought we'd get thousands and thousands of phone calls because that's what other councils had in similar demographic to ours had. And we only got 600 phone calls over a 4-week period, and 80% were because people thought their bags were damaged because they couldn't open them because they were so fine. Other than that, there was little, and that was testament to the detailed campaign that we had put forward before we actually started the service.
So it's a lot of the internal communications that you focused on, as well as the external, so making sure your internal team knew what was going on, knew how to respond, etc. And I understand that log, or whatever you call it, the responses that you've pre-written out, that's available on your website for other councils as well, is that right?
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to do was make sure that all the resources that we'd put together were available for other councils, rather than everyone always reinventing the wheel. So on council's website, all of the resources that we used are available for any other councils. Frequently asked questions, surveys, brochures, fridge magnet design, poster design, compendium inserts. We did this thing called a Fogomentary. We got Costa from Gardening Australia. He was our ambassador, and we created this Fogomentary with the kids and Costa, and that talked about why we were rolling out Fogo. It's a 30-minute story. It's on our Facebook page. It's beautiful, but they're the kinds of things that we wanted to make available to other councils, because we successfully rolled the program out so well, I think, and we want to help where we can, really.
That's an excellent thing that you guys are doing, sharing all that information. I'm sure the councils listening in are eager to look up the Bega Valley Council website. So yeah, maybe Google. I actually I found it the other day, and yeah, so if you look at, if you search and Google Fogo and Bega Valley Council, and help for councils, I think those are the keywords I found, but I'll also distribute a link later on if people are interested to find all that great information you guys are sharing, Joley. One thing I noticed about those resources is there's a very clear branding in them too. So the graphic design, the colours, and everything like this, it's very clear that those messages are coming from council and not some other random source of information. How important was that for you to have that branding, do you think?
I think it was critical. So one of the things I've always thought was really important is you want people to know that it's come from council. One of the things I noticed with council was a lot of the time the media releases and the documentation is written by technical experts, but it's dry. So I engaged a media consultant, MP Media Solutions. They're local to the Bega Valley, and Melissa, who owns that company, and I worked together, and she's got a journalistic background. So we made sure that all of the stories were really relatable to the community. They were engaging, that a media company could pick up the story and put it straight into their publication without having to reword it. But that branding was critical. So we used council style guide, and then we brought our own branding in. And it's because there's all this misconception about waste and what happens, you know, like we've got split lift trucks. Of course, everything's going to landfill, and we've been trying to dispel the myths. And for us, a part of that is showing that we're a professional organisation, and branding and stylising is just one aspect of that.
That's really interesting to hear. And you've also mentioned before that you had all these different household types, different demographics, etc. And the service you're offering was everyone moves to fortnightly waste, and you have weekly Fogo. Can you take us through some of the options you also provided to households that didn't have those? So needs?
We have a 2-bin and a 3-bin service. So the rural residents still have the 2-bin service. And then for the residents in town, you still want to steer them into a direction, but you want to make sure that you've still got control of it, just like you would with, I don't want to say like with little kids, but it's the same sort of premise. So it was like, okay, you got to have a 3-bin service, but you can mix up the bin sizes. So you can have a 360 litre yellow bin, you can have an 80 litre yellow bin, and you can do the same. So people still feel that they've got control. And that's a big part of that behaviour change. People are scared, thinking they're not going to understand what's happening. So you give them back some control, and then you get the ownership of it. So you say, you're in a unit, you don't need 3 big bins, get little bins, but you're still going to have the 3-bin service, but you design it in a way that works for you.
Oh, excellent. We'll move back over to Esther very shortly, but just one last question for now, because we'll come back and take some more questions from the audience, take some questions from the audience at the end. But one that's coming through is, how much did your general waste reduce by as a result of introducing this weekly Fogo fortnightly waste service?
Yeah, so we have seen a reduction of 33%, which is massive. And what that meant for our landfill was a total of 10% of the total waste to landfill has been diverted to a Fogo service, which is an amazing result. It's about $1 million for us in capital cost savings. So it's a big chunk of money.
Awesome stuff. All right, well, thank you, Joley. So we'll come back to you again after we've spoken to Esther, but thank you for those insights. So I'd like to introduce our second speaker now, Esther Landells. So I spoke to Esther a few times over the last year when she was working in a previous role at the City of Melville in Western Australia. And she recently completed the Fogo rollout across the city, which has been a massive success. Esther is really passionate about food waste, and since her contract is finished with Melville, she's now undertaking a PhD in food waste diversion. How cool is that? But even more awesome is that Esther is joining us today from somewhere in the middle of Australia. She's on a road trip with her family, travelling through, and is taking the time to be here with us. So thank you very much, Esther, for joining.
You're very welcome. Great pleasure to be with you.
So the City of Melville is obviously very different from Bega. To start, it's a city council in a city context in Western Australia. Can you just share a little bit of information about the City of Melville?
Certainly can. It's very much, as you say, a metro council. Lies about 8 kilometres to the south of the city of Perth. It's about 52 square kilometres in its area, and it's 42,000 dwellings. These are all approximate figures, and about 102,000 residents.
And what's
Varied demographics, quite a lot of young families, quite a lot of elderly, and quite a lot in between. So the whole range of social demographics in the area.
And in terms of density, is it mostly low density or high density or a mix of both?
We haven't got very many multi-unit dwellings.
Yep.
I think there's only a total of 42 multi-unit dwellings. A lot of it is, most of it, the predominant number is single-unit dwellings, SUDs.
Okay. And before, so the City of Melville moved to a weekly Fogo, correct me if I'm wrong, weekly Fogo, fortnightly waste and fortnightly commingled on an alternating basis as the standard service. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. And what did the city have before they changed over to that service?
Before then, they had their weekly general waste and weekly recycling. A couple of years previously, they were on fortnightly recycling. So the changeover on the recycling possibly wasn't quite so hard, but certainly the fortnightly general waste, that was the big challenge.
Yeah, and so I understand Melville took a bit of a different approach in that you guys did a trial before you rolled it out in a big way. So can you take us through some of the aspects of the trial and what were the results?
Absolutely. I think that if you have the opportunity to do a trial, it is extremely useful. I joined after the trial was completed, but it provided us with so much background information on what to do well, what not to do, what to avoid, all the good learning curves, and also it gets your community used to the idea that they're going to go Fogo. So the trial involved 5 very different areas within the city and about 7,000 residents. And it did all the usual things that Joley was talking about, which was the preemptive strike with the letters and the social media and everything that you can possibly do to inform them that this is going to happen. And of course, the most important thing, training your customer service so that they can actually respond to the questions that are going to come in from the people who haven't read, haven't heard, and didn't have the faintest idea that their bins were going to change.
You always got people who don't read their mail.
Yes.
So did you get many complaints with the change in service, and how did you manage them?
There's a knee-jerk reaction, and I think it's a very difficult thing to fully manage that in advance. Joley obviously did a really good job on their side. I think here our approach was more to be responding to the issues as they came up. Obviously we did as much as we could to preempt those issues, but it's having the full range of capacity to answer any of those questions as soon as possible. And one of the learning curves that came out is that the frequently asked questions, have that ready to go. Your training of your customer service staff, that is vitally important, and they've got to be on board. And one of the other things we learned from it was the outstations like libraries and things of that nature, they need to be fully trained. They need to be totally aware. They're very much customer facing, and they've got to be on board and supportive and understand what the process is.
That's really important, that internal communications piece that Joley also touched on, and making sure everyone, so it's not always just the people you think of at the beginning, so it's not just the customer service staff, it's getting that training all the way down to the library staff, because they're the ones interacting with the community and making sure they're on board as well. So yeah,
absolutely.
interesting. And the results of the pilot, so I understand it was very successful and you did community surveys throughout and at the end, and from memory was it something like 79% or 80%, the majority of residents wanted weekly Fogo fortnightly waste to continue. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes, that's right. 80% were supportive of it and wanted to keep on going. I think that the other thing that confirmed that it was a valid exercise was contamination rate. The expectation that would be up in the 8s, 10s, 20s, somewhere horrible, and it was actually 3%.
Okay.
So that really supported the program and showed that we had the messaging right at the time.
Oh, excellent. So managing that contamination rate, and from memory as well, the diversion rate, so the percentage of diversion across the 3 streams was in the order of about 64 to 66% overall from the trial. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
that's correct. 60%.
That's far ahead of some councils around Australia, so it is a really outstanding result to get that, you know, obviously it's that food and garden organics across to the right bin. Yeah. Also wanted to ask you about the choice and flexibility, because I understand, similar to Joley's council, you provided some choice to households on what bin, was it bin size, numbers of bins or something like that. Can you take through?
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is a bit of a important point as well. You are better off if you can provide some wriggle room to your residents. Now, the way that Melville did this was they provided a standard service. So it was your 240 litre recycling, your 240 litre Fogo, and your 140 general waste. But if you had families who were struggling with the size of their recycling, then it was an automatic upgrade to a 360 litre. They just had to ring in, request it, and it would happen. However, with the general waste, there was a process that we put in place which involved red bin auditing. So what it was, they'd ring in, say they couldn't cope with their general waste capacity, needed a bigger bin, and they would go on a list, and we would go out and inspect the bin, make sure that there were no organics, no recyclables, anything in there that shouldn't be in there. And if it was valid, you know, like a family with stacks of nappies or elderly with sanitation things, then we'd obviously upsize the bin straight away. However, it had to be genuine. So that ripple effect was the fact that the bin had to be used properly. People had to be doing the right thing. They had to be seen to be making the effort. And then, yes, absolutely, they could have the larger bin.
Okay, so you've still got a couple of barriers in place, so otherwise everyone would say, hey, I want a free bin, it would cost the council heaps, and it would defeat the purpose of the whole pilot or the whole rollout, full rollout service.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah. I really like that model you introduced there, to kind of, you know, but then still give a bin if there's a genuine need. But in the 360 litre commingled recycling bins were, and there are no problems for collection by the contractor?
No. Melville has its own collection service. It's an internal one, so it didn't. And we did flag this as a potential issue with overweight bins, but it didn't actually come to fruition. And when I left, there'd been no cases of incidents with overweight bins, so it was still going okay.
Okay. Absolutely. Okay, so you provide this choice and flexibility to the councils, to the community, and that kind of alleviates their concerns with not being able to manage their waste.
That's right. Yes.
What about nappies? Because this is always the issue that keeps coming up: is what am I going to do with my stinky nappies? Oh my gosh, I can't leave them for 2 weeks. I'm going to die. The world's going to fall apart. How did you manage that conversation?
I think nappies were top of our FAQs. What to do with a bin full of nappies? The first port of call was always the advisory of wrapping them up as tight as possible, stopping the oxygen getting to them. And we found some research that actually supported the fact that they get to their most smelly at day 4, which I think actually was a South Australian research. So they get to their most smelly at day 4. It doesn't get any better, but it doesn't get any worse. So I used that line a lot with people. If they need the larger bin, that's fine, but the advice was still the same: keep it in the shade, reduce the oxygen flow as much as possible, and yes, just, you know, tie them up as tight as you can, and that's it.
That's good advice, and a good clear message on that.
And of course, there's the reusable nappies. We always push those ones as well. It was a good time to put forward for going on the reusable and sustainable nappies as well.
And I've got a question here. Could the community have 240 litre garbage bins too? How did you signal to the community that 360 litre is a special need?
Oh no, no. The 360 litre recycling bin was the upgrade from the 240, so that was an automatic. And believe me, the community finds out very, very quickly what they're going to get for free. So that went around like wildfire. And that's another advisory for people who are going to go down this route: make sure you have lots more stock than you anticipate needing, because you will probably need it. When it comes to the upgrade of the general waste bin, that was going up from a 140 to a 240. We do have special needs. We do have people with doctor certificates, of course, and they were automatically put up if they needed to, but all the rest had to go through the red bin audit system in order to get the larger red bin.
And I've got a question here from Tony Lee from City of Gold Coast. Were there price differentials for those who upsized their bin sizes?
No,
No,
no, it's free. It was
it's free. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'll have to touch back on just Joley, if you can take your mute off quickly. Was there, just out of curiosity, was there any price signals for you guys for changing bin sizes?
Yeah, there were. So it just depended on, I guess, what the changes were. So people that needed bins for medical needs, we still charged them the difference. But all we did was we charged the actual collection costs. We didn't put any administration costs on there. So it wasn't double the price. For more collections, it was a little bit more expensive, basically.
Okay, so a little bit of a different approach there. With you guys have a little bit of a price signal to discourage people taking up extra bins, just you know, unless they really needed it, I guess. Yeah, okay, excellent. All right, back to Esther. So I've got another question here from Brian Johnston. So you mentioned before that you were doing visual inspections of the bins and to check if they genuinely needed a bigger red bin. The question was, were these visual bin audits from just lifting the lids?
Basically, yes. It was myself or trained people who would go out and do them. I would take a trailer full of replacement bins. I'd go out with a rear load truck. We'd tip it into the back. If I was at all suspicious about what was in it, we'd tip it into the truck, have a look at that, and then it was yes or no from then. A lot of it was just straight bin top inspections, and you know what it's like. You get the feeling for when it's genuine and when it isn't. If you open it and it's full of electrical goods, then you know the message hasn't quite got through.
Okay, and did you face, so you had this really big successful pilot which helped get community buy-in. I'm guessing it helped with the councils as well, giving them confidence to go forward with it?
Yes, and I think that's actually a really important point as well. With Melville, they rolled it out internally to staff before we did it throughout the city. So that meant that everybody was experiencing the same thing and all the questions were the same questions. And that was really a very important thing to do and get everybody on board with it that way.
So they were included in the pilot or the pre-pilot?
No, we did them just before the full rollout.
Okay, got you. Okay, got you. Well, that's excellent advice, because I guess then, you know, if they understand how it works, they can respond to the community's needs in the moment when they're having, you know, Jan from next door come and have a chat. They can say, well, actually, I can, you can manage it this way, rather than having an earful and going, oh, I'll answer your question and it festering. So one of the key messages I keep hearing, themes through this talk, is don't let things fester. Get people ready so you can have the answers straight away, and make sure you can get the whole council being involved with that communications approach.
That's right.
From the library staff member up to the councillor. So
yes.
No, really, really interesting. So yeah, as I said, so it was really popular having this pilot in place, but then you were involved with the actual rollout across the whole city, which is a big undertaking. How did you approach that? Was it the whole city at once that you rolled out on a certain day, or did you approach it neighbourhood by neighbourhood, or how did you go about that?
It was a staged approach. So we did it over basically a 3-month process, and we started only with the single unit dwellings. So it was your householders initially, not multi-unit dwellings. Those were a bit more complex. We did them second, and the retirement villages after that. When it came to the rollout for the single unit dwellings, we did it, it rolled through quite well throughout the whole of the city over the period of time. And we decided that we weren't going to go with a simple lid change. We were actually going to bring new bins. The lid changes just ended up with more broken bins. We did try it, but it didn't work. So we ended up doing the new bin system. And the preemptive for that were the public communication sessions. These were extremely popular. They were always overbooked and over-attended. And at that point, we would explain how the system was going to change, when they needed to start using it, and what would happen. So that was really important. That's actually up on the website as well, so people can take a look at the presentation and see exactly how we did that.
I've got a question here from Marav Goldberg. Was there any strong resistance to fortnightly garbage?
Oh, I think you're always going to get that, yes. Most of them, I'd say 99% of people you can talk round, And I did a lot of talking, believe me, and a lot of household visits as well. In a metropolitan council, you have the luxury of everybody being 5 minutes down the road. So I could go and talk directly to people. And we did that a lot. You're always going to get some diehards, some naysayers. But the virtue of the trial was that the trial people, once we rolled it out to the rest of the city, could say, oh, yeah, we've been doing this for ages. What are you making such a fuss about? Just get on with it.
And did you get any bad media or press, I should say, with it happening?
Yes, I think there was always some misinformation that was bound to come about, and you just have to take it on the chin and show the good bits that you are doing, and the fact that most of the community are actually very supportive of this and want to do it, and they understand. And like Joley was saying, the message was both economic and environmental. From my perspective, it was very simply putting back what you're taking out. You know, we are removing your organics, that 33%, out of your red bin and putting it back into the soil where it belongs. So that was very strongly received, as were the economic benefits of doing it that way as well.
I've got another question from Ricardo Salsa. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. How are you dealing with compostable packaging? Any instruction to separate or not?
Yes, lot of information went out. We did the full gold-plated rollout. So we had the caddy, the liners, the information. We did the pre-letters, the during letters, the post letters. We did information up to the eyeballs. But the most important thing, and Joley touched on this, was how to open a caddy liner. Strangely enough, people think they're broken because they're so delicate. They don't realize you can actually open it the whole way and stretch it over the caddy. So we even did social media on how to put a caddy liner on a caddy.
All right, it's challenging. I mean, yeah, there's so much there, but it's interesting to hear that there's so many common things between what you're saying, Esther, and what Joley has touched on. I might invite Joley to join the conversation again, because we've got a whole bunch of questions that I think you both could probably answer. But whilst we're talking about compostable packaging, so Joley, did you allow residents to put compostable ware, like serviceware, in the bin, or was that out of the question?
Yeah, we have, and the Bega Valley Shire Council have currently been running some trials with the CSIRO and the New South Wales EPA for both compostable packaging, PLA film, and we also did a compostable nappy trial, and that was a direct result of just meeting the needs of the community with regards to nappies. So yeah, we're keen to support where we can, because I think in the future there's going to be a hell of a lot of compostable packaging, and that's a different sort of source of material, particularly carbon, and therefore we need to be able to manage that from a processing perspective. So yeah, if it's compostable and it's got the certified compostable logo, then put it in the Fogo bin.
Excellent, thanks Joley. I've got one from Lauren Mercia from, well, around the corner from me. She lives very close. She says, I think this is directed at Melville, great diversion rate at 66%, but what do you think needs to happen to push this further into the 70+ range?
Yes, I think there's a lot of materials that shouldn't be going into a domestic waste system at all, and I think there needs to be a lot more work done on those. You're still getting household DIY rubbish going into bins, which shouldn't be. You're still getting electronics going in, which shouldn't be. You're getting hazardous waste such as spray cans going in. Again, it's the information out in the general public, but you have to do it very simply. It has to be so simple that, you know, your 5-year-old can follow it, like Joley's school kids, and it has to be repeated over and over and over again.
And Joley, do you have any separate thoughts about that in terms of taking it to the next level? How do you get that really, really high level of diversion, 70+%?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Esther. I think one of the challenges is, you know, we're all working with different MRF operators, and therefore what each MRF takes is different, and how they receive material and what's contamination and what isn't, and some consistency across the board at a national level, federal level, is really what we need to advocate for. And I know the industry definitely are advocating for that. Yeah, product stewardships definitely work. We've seen that in New South Wales, and that's something that is really critical. And I 100% agree, you've got to keep the messaging up, and you have to keep it simple. but it needs to be consistent as well. If we can get some consistency across the states, then that would make it, much easier.
It is challenging. It's challenging because there's so many different product items too, and they change every day as well with what kind of packaging items we're ending up.
Western Australia is doing a fantastic job through WOLGA, and the fact that this rollout here with Melville was a joint rollout between 3 councils, and it works with the Southern Metropolitan Regional Council, and that messaging consistency across the councils makes life so much easier. So sorry, I just thought I'd better get that one in.
No, that's good, Esther. And we have a campaign called Which Bin in South Australia, which used to be an East Waste campaign. A lady called Megan came up with it, and now it's actually been adopted across the whole of South Australia, and we're seeing some more of the consistent messages here too. So you do raise a good point. There is an opportunity to have more consistent messaging across at least the state base to help people with that. I want to touch on community champions. So we've got another question from Lauren Mercier. How valuable are community champions?
Shall I answer that one?
Please, you start.
Okay. I think the value of community champions, yes, definitely, and especially with specific groups, such as your COLD groups, your culturally and linguistically diverse groups, because the language that we speak may not be the language that other people understand. So if you can find key champions within those key groups, then again, it makes your life easier. And yes, hugely supportive. And that was always one of my goals, was to find as many people that could be champions for Fogo in this case, as possible, and support them to the hilt to do their job and work with them as much as possible.
Excellent. And Joley, what's your opinion about community champions and the role that they play?
Yeah, I agree. Like behaviour change, once you get 10 to 15% of the population on board, you've got that momentum and it's hard to stop it. So how do you get those 10 to 15%? You target those. And a really good way is bringing them in and giving them ownership. And that's what you do with, with championing people, is you give them ownership. And for our council, we did that with the kids and their families. So, you've got 500 or 1,000 people from 50 kids that become your champions. Excellent.
And I've got a question from Mark Rawson, who's sitting in the next room behind me. So I think, I'm not sure who this is questions for, but probably maybe Joley, did you offer a user pays weekly general waste service for those who are still not happy with fortnightly?
Only, so yes, but only for holiday, high tourist area in the Bega Valley. So we only offered it for multi-unit dwellings that were for holiday accommodation. For anybody else, no, except for medical needs. We were really, really strict on that.
And so you raise a good point there in terms of those holiday homes where it's very transient and people come and stay and they generate a lot of waste, and you don't want to leave that waste waiting for the next visitors the following week. So I guess that's important. You have that flexibility, not just for the different demographics, but also for like visitors and holiday makers in the region.
And listening to your customers. So they were really concerned, holiday accommodation strata managers, and we tried to, resolve their concerns by making it a user pay system for a weekly service. And a lot of people visiting the area don't have a Fogo service. They know nothing about it. So for us, it was making sure that, we supported their businesses as critical.
Absolutely. So we have a question here from Michelle or Michael, sorry, I'm not sure. What's the most common contaminant found by both councils?
Plastic bags and the recycling.
Plastic bags and the recycling, yep.
Yep.
Yes, soft plastics in both. In the, I think they only make up a couple of % in the Fogo bin, but by volume, when you're looking at it and you're looking at a skip bin of contamination, it's pretty much all soft plastic.
Yep.
So that messaging is still pretty tricky.
Still not getting through. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice if we had a ban on soft plastics for? We have some legislation coming, some more legislation coming in South Australia, but we have, of course, the plastic bag ban in supermarkets. So I guess that all helps to reduce the amount of soft plastics that we're dealing with. So I've got a question from Marav Goldberg. Were there any businesses serviced and were part of the rollout. This might be for you, Esther.
No, we decided that we were going to wait with the businesses to make sure that we got the residential all sorted out first. Very keen, of course, to get that food waste diverted, but no, not at the initial stage.
Okay. We do have businesses, and we also ran a trial in one of our towns for businesses, and the most important factor with businesses is you can't let them have a 240 litre bin because the trucks can't lift them. So we've got a 140 litre bin service. And again, the New South Wales EPA have just given me a big chunk of money to roll out Fogo for business, and we're about to start. We've got a project officer engaged, and the project planning's all done. Probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll be kicking that project off. So, and they were busting. The businesses were absolutely busting to get on board. And some of them it was easy, hairdressers and those sorts of things, easy. Cafes, restaurants, a bit more challenging because the frequency, the once a week frequency, isn't enough. And that's what our new project will be identifying on the first instance is what's the best frequency option? What does that look like from a contract perspective?
And I've got a question here from Marina Wagner. Did you offer an opt-in weekly service only during holiday seasons or all year round?
That's to Joley.
Yeah, no, we didn't. They can get weekly service, but it's all year, and it's just a cost. It's administration cost to be swapping and changing bins over, and so no, we didn't.
Yeah, so but for the holiday makers that could pay the extra amount for the weekly waste, when they sign up for that, could they have it all year round, or is it just for the peak holiday period?
All year round.
All year round. Yep. And I've got a question here from Rowan Lang. Hi, Joley. Curious to know how the waste charge for Bega works and overcoming the mentality of you're cutting my service in half.
Yeah, well, good question. So we've split our waste charges up. So part of it is the waste management charge, which is charged separately under the Local Government Act of New South Wales. And that funds the transfer stations and education programs. And then the other part of the charge is for the bin lifts and the administration costs for that. Our community actually ended up with more collections per month. So they went from, I think it was 7 to 8 collections per month. And so it was quite an easy sell for our community. But people, it doesn't matter what you're doing, they still think they're getting something taken away. And that was something that we really strongly went back to the community with our messaging was you're actually getting more services, an increased level of service, not a declining or a decreased level of service. So that was a messaging that we pushed out and still push out now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joley. So we've got about 5 minutes remaining, so I might hold the rest of the questions for now, but I will try to take a record of them and pass them along. So I understand Esther and Joley are both happy to receive follow-up questions if we didn't get the chance to cover them today, because the question line is going crazy. We've got so many questions feeding through. It's obviously a very hot topic and a complicated one, which is why there's so much to learn from you both. So to finish up with, I'll start with Esther. What 3 takeaways would you like to leave the audience from this webinar?
Okay, I think that give yourself as much run-in time as you possibly can. If you have the option to run a trial, you'll find it extremely useful. Train your staff. Make sure that you have them on board. It only takes one bad pebble in a pond to send out a lot of ripples. So you need to have your own people on board before you even do this. You know that there's going to be pitfalls along the way. It's the joy of going Fogo, but it is so worthwhile at the end. And if you can switch it around so that the community is aware that they are the ones who are driving it, then that is a really key factor in your planning.
Thank you, Esther. Fantastic. And Joley, last takeaways, 3 takeaways for the audience?
Yeah, definitely the planning. Probably even before the planning, build the relationships with your community and your councillors. That's so vital. And don't do it at the time and tell them. Build the relationships long before so that when you are asking them, they trust you and they know you. Plan. And also make sure that when you are resourcing, that you resource for the whole of the project for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not just Monday to Friday, 9 till 5.
Okay. From lived experience, Joley.
Yes, I'm still traumatized.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you very much to our guest speakers, Esther and Joley. You ladies are fantastic and real leaders in your space, and it's just wonderful for you to be happy to share your experience with the councils and other people listening in today. You have achieved a lot, and it's not it's definitely because of the people like yourself behind these things, your hard work. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Very well.
I'd also like to thank our audience for listening in today. And for your amazing questions. Sorry we didn't get the chance to go through all of them. As I mentioned, I think we have many that we ran out of time to answer, but I will pass them along. And I guess, Esther, what's the best way for people to reach out to you? Is it on LinkedIn? Is that the best way?
Yes, LinkedIn is probably the best way at the moment. Yeah, whilst we're travelling across Australia.
Yeah, excellent. And Joley, LinkedIn, or do you have a preference?
Yeah, no preference. LinkedIn or email is easy for me.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Esther and Joley. And I encourage the audience to stay in touch. Keep in touch and watch out for our future webinars. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the 5th one we've done, and it's something we really enjoy doing, to take the opportunity to share best practice even during these COVID times when we're still a little bit isolated from one another professionally. So thank you for listening in, and I hope you have a wonderful day.